Actually, let's talk more politics. Joining me now is Jack Rowlett. He is a political commentator. Good evening to you, Jack.
Good evening.
Very good to see you. I don't know what to think of this anymore. Every single day there's something worse that seems to appear. In terms of inflation, we know it's at 10%, 10.1% at the moment, thought to go up to 18%. Citigroup saying inflation is about to hit the stratosphere. Where is the government?
Well, exactly. That's the point. Where is the government? It's nowhere to be seen. We were promised when Boris Johnson said he was going to stay on over the summer that he was going to keep working, that the government was going to come up with policy solutions, was going to keep the country running through this cost of living crisis, and he's nowhere to be seen. But also, the two leadership candidates are nowhere to be seen really either. They're not coming up with competent policy solutions on the cost of living crisis. You mentioned the getting GPs to write prescriptions for money off energy bills. I mean, I don't know who's looked at the state that the NHS is in at the moment and thought, let's give GPs more work to do. It's ridiculous. And we've had that projection from Citibank saying that inflation is going to hit 18% in January. I don't know about you, but I've simply stopped believing these inflation pieces of analysis, because before we were promised that it was going to hit 5%. Then a couple of weeks ago, the Bank of England said it was going to hit 13%. Now it's 18%. The reality is that things are just moving too quickly, and we really do need Parliament to be recalled. And ideally, I think Rishi Sunak should step in and say, I'm backing out now. I'm clearly going to lose. We need a prime minister who can actually come up with a policy solution to the cost of living crisis. Liz Truss is going to win. Let's just let her start her job, really.
Many people feel the same way. We believe 150,000 can vote in this contest. We believe 80% of those votes have been counted. There again, we don't know the outcome. So, and I understand also that Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss gave an undertaking at the beginning that neither would pull out. But I am inclined to come round to your point of view here. I just feel that someone needs to do something and do it quickly.
Well, the truth is they're being totally outflanked as well. Labour have come up with a policy on the energy crisis, which I think is a bad policy because it doesn't do enough to support businesses, and it doesn't level with people about the problem of supply. But it's a very popular policy, and it's led to Labour running away in the polls over the Conservatives, and we've seen Liz Truss's approval ratings fall back. So they're being totally outflanked. So just for the sake of the Conservative Party, they need to come up with something good, and they need to come up with something soon. We're looking at a winter that is just going to be so miserable. I mean, just yesterday, we saw that the price of wholesale gas is going up 40%. That was just yesterday. And
yeah.
The government is nowhere to be seen.
I know. You are absolutely right. I saw that figure indeed. The fact is also Russia is cutting off Nord Stream 1. They say that's for 3 days for maintenance, but goodness knows what happens if they do cut that off. We also know that shoppers are suffering a hit of something like £160 a month already. And of course, on Friday, we have the announcement of the energy price cap, which we believe will go up quite significantly. And there's no one here from Parliament.
No, it's true. It's true. And the problems aren't just in terms of energy. There are much broader problems as well. We look at the state the NHS is in. We look at crime at the moment. There are a bunch of criminal barristers are saying they're going to go on strike now because they're demanding a pay rise of 25%. The government is only prepared to offer them 15%. So we're seeing the justice system totally backlogged. We've got a situation where crimes like theft have essentially been decriminalised. You can't get hold of someone to investigate it for you. And essentially, if you're a criminal now, you're thinking, well, there's never been a better time to be a criminal. And if you're just an ordinary citizen, you're thinking, I'm scared and I don't want to get ill because I know that I'm going to be waiting in the hospital for 24 hours to get treatment. I don't want to be a victim of crime. I mean, no one wants to be a victim of crime, but now is a particularly bad time. The whole country is falling apart, and there are no ideas really from anywhere about how we can improve things. And to be frank, there's no one who's really prepared to level with the public and say, actually, this winter is going to be horrible. Our public services are in disarray and things are going to get worse before they get better.
And why do you think this has happened? What went wrong? Everything seemed to be coasting along quite merrily. Obviously, there was a war in Ukraine, but it seems to me that maybe the politicians took their eye off the ball a long time ago. They let things drift. We've seen that in the health service. Doctors like me have been warning about this for a long time. We have an enormous number of people trying to get treatment. There aren't enough doctors, there aren't enough nurses, there aren't enough hospital beds. We know that the police aren't on the front line. What went wrong?
Well, I think to a certain extent, the pandemic was such a difficult period of time that politicians came out of it and sort of seemed to have thought, well, that's the job done. We can go back to normal now. And actually didn't take into account that there were already a lot of structural problems in our public services before the pandemic, but also they've been made a lot worse by the pandemic. And that's a large part of why we have those backlogs in surgery, for example, and the backlogs in criminal justice cases as well. But I think also there's been a real toxic combination of, we've had a government under Boris Johnson that has been quite unserious, has just sat on its hands and done U-turns and not really come up with proper policy solutions and sort of thought, let's just hope for the best and things will be all right. And that's been combined with a rudderless opposition who haven't really come up with any good ideas, who haven't offered serious opposition to the government, haven't offered a serious, credible alternative government or alternative prime minister in the form of Keir Starmer. And the result is that our politics has become broken and the state of the country has got worse and worse. I don't really have much faith, looking at Liz Truss, that she's going to be able to fix things. She doesn't really seem to have many ideas. She doesn't really seem to have serious leadership. And she seems to also be falling into the trap that Boris Johnson so often did of just U-turning on things repeatedly and blaming other people for her problems.
I mean, it's just really interesting. So in terms, and I said this earlier, that I'm no economist, but it seems to me that if you're offering tax cuts at a time when you're servicing your debt, where interest rates are going to go up, say, to 7%, and then you're going to pay more to service your already massive debt, £400 billion or whatever it is, and then at the same time saying you're offering tax cuts, none of that makes any sense to me whatsoever.
No, it's not a coherent approach at all. And Liz Truss likes to compare herself to Margaret Thatcher. Margaret Thatcher would not be doing this now. It's totally economically illiterate, and it's going to make the problem worse. And actually, inflation, if interest rates go up, as you said, to 7%, that's going to be a lot of people who are going to be really struggling with the cost of borrowing just at the time they're going to have to borrow more to get by. And in terms of the tax cuts as well, they're not offering support really to the people who need it. Look, I'm on the centre-right. I would rather that taxes were on the lower side. But right now, the priority has to be getting support to those on lower and middle incomes who really need it. And it's pennies or a small number of pounds that they're going to get from these tax cuts that Liz Truss is going to push through, whilst people on higher incomes are getting thousands of pounds back.
I mean, you make a really good point about Margaret Thatcher and Liz Truss saying she is like Thatcher. I saw an intervention today by Brian Griffiths, Lord Griffiths, who was Margaret Thatcher's policy chief. He said, Mrs. Thatcher, for her, it would be inconceivable to cut taxes before defeating inflation. He then goes on to urge Tory voters to vote for Sunak. I thought that was just really a fascinating intervention at this stage in the leadership contest. Had he made that earlier, that might have had some more effect, mightn't it?
Well, it's true. I think we're in quite a weird situation where we have a party, the Conservatives, who are very pro-Brexit. They love Margaret Thatcher. They love sensible economics, or at least that's their image. And yet they're backing a candidate who backed Remain, who has the total opposite approach from Thatcher, who doesn't really seem to have any understanding of how to run the economy in a conservative way. It just seems like she's sort of throwing out meaningless buzz phrases of, I'm going to cut taxes, let's not talk ourselves into recession. And actually, Sunak is a much more serious candidate. But unfortunately, they're not going to vote him in. And it's just going to make things worse, I think.
And it's so interesting how this has all changed. At the beginning, everyone was certainly saying Liz Truss has the right idea, and I said it as well. The fact is you need to cut tax, put money in people's pockets. They can then use that money. That then stimulates the economy. But now I've come round to the feeling that actually, given the figures and the fact it's all unravelling, maybe Rishi Sunak is right. Maybe we do need to get inflation under control. So I think many people are going through this process of not really understanding the gravity of the situation and indeed changing their minds. Now, what that does to that leadership contest, I'm not entirely sure.
No, and I think really at this stage, it's not really possible for Rishi Sunak to win just based on the polling. I think we know that Liz Truss is going to come out on top. But it does seem bizarre in a way, because this campaign towards the members does seem to have really suited Sunak in a sense, in terms of essentially everything he's been saying has turned out to be correct. we have had inflation continuing to rise. We have had energy bills continue to worsen, and we have had a whole series of analysts and individuals and politicians and former politicians come out and say, no, now is not the time to cut taxes. We need to focus on inflation first. But it just doesn't seem to have moved the dial, which I think is strange, because I think historically the Tories, whatever you want to say about them, have been pretty good at picking winners in these leadership contests. I don't think that's necessarily going to be the case this time.
And it's so interesting, and just very quickly, why do you think all of those MPs then backed Liz Truss? If everything you say is right, that Rishi Sunak has been proved to be right, why did they back her?
Well, I think it's the fact that some of them, I think, view Rishi Sunak as a backstabber for being part of the fall of Boris Johnson. And I think a lot of those on the right of the party think his tenure as Chancellor was a disaster, really, and that he raised taxes to the highest level since the war, and that that's just not acceptable. But I think they should have approached it in a much more pragmatic way of saying, actually, it's not a choice between tax cuts and tackling inflation. The choice is which we prioritise first.
Very, very sensible comments indeed, Jack. Thank you very much indeed. That's Jack Rowlett, who is a political commentator. After the break, I'll be taking your calls, your thoughts and your messages, and the switchboard has lit up. This is TalkTV.